In European Union, there are 16 million private forest owners who own 60% of forests. And this big family is the key to realize the strategic orientations and commitments of the new European Union Forest Strategy and other policies that concern forestry. And further, this big family ensure the major contributions to green jobs and biocircular economy, especially in rural areas. But this European Union family of private forest owners is also calling to shed light on impacts of EU forest-related policies to their property rights. Present video conference will definitely bring some important facts on this topic that are useful and important for decision makers on a national and EU level. So I wish you also good discussion on subject through conference and good conclusions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. We will have two videos from the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Food of Slovenia, and then it's going to be Mr. Podgoršek, Jože Podgoršek, and the second one is going to be the President of Chamber of Agriculture and Forestry, Roman Žvegič. There are two videos. They are not here today, but they give the floor to us and they will say some words to us.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to address the participants of this event by video conference. We often say that forests are our greatest treasure, and I believe it is true. They are particularly important in these special times because we can go to forest to find peace and quiet, enjoy the beauties of nature, escape the stress of everyday life, and take care of our health and internal balance. Forests are becoming an increasingly important area of EU policies since 40% of the EU's territory is covered by forests. They are invaluable for the quality of life of its citizens and rural development, for enhancing biodiversity and tackling climate change. They also play a crucial role in numerous other areas. Forest restoration is a fundamental part of sustainable, close to nature and multifunctional forest management. In Slovenia, forest restoration is mainly natural. However, seedlings of forest species are also planted if necessary. This means that, in practice, a large majority of trees grown from the seeds of adult local trees. If this is not possible, we help the forest to restore by planting appropriate tree species. By taking care of the trees in line with the rules in all phases of their growth, we enhance the stability and the value of forests and improve their functions. Only forests that are in good shape can make a lasting contribution to the economic development of the society, in particular in rural areas. As outlined in the vision of the National Forest Program, we have to take into account in sustainable use and the extraction of forest goods that forests play an important role in ensuring a healthy living environment, people's well-being, and social development of the economy. One of the key priorities of the Slovenian presidency was the adoption of Council conclusions on the new EU forest strategy. We have succeeded in doing so in November's Council. The strategy focuses on sustainable and multifunctional forest management and seeking balance between the environmental, social, and economic dimensions of sustainability. Only such approach to forests can have a significant contribution to achieving numerous objectives of the European Green Deal. Cooperation in forestry results in sustainable, close to nature and multifunctional forest management. Allow me to highlight the coordinated action between forest owners, public services, and other links of the forest wood chain. Only such approach will enable us to successfully manage the forests, limit the economic damage resulting from natural disasters, which are more and more frequent, and restore the damaged forests as quickly as possible. I would like to emphasize the forest dialogue, which continues to take place in the process of revising forest and hunting management plans for regional units. In this context, the cooperation of forest owners and forestry organizations is particularly important since the plans will determine forest management in the next 10 years. We also address forests in the Common Agriculture Policy Strategic Plan, which is about to be adopted. The strategic plan foresees to continue and enhance measures such as investment in forest infrastructure, the purchase of new machinery and equipment for the work in forests, investment in pre-industrial wood processing, in setting up producer groups and training forest owners, and investment in the restoration of forest damage by natural disasters. The measures will be adopted to investments in the establishment and development of forestry nurseries, the construction and maintenance of fire safety infrastructure, the management of torrent, the design, expansion, improvement and maintenance of grazing areas and rooted up areas, and training the advisors. Let me conclude by saying that all these objectives can be reached only if we join forces and cooperate. I wish you a successful continuation of the event. Thank you.
And now we're going to give the floor. Also, we have the video from Roman Žveglič, the president of the Chamber of Agriculture and Forestry of Slovenia.
Spoštovani, današnja konferenca je za slovenske lastnike na nek način prelomnica, saj se vprašanje lastninskih pravic obravnava poglobljeno, v mednarodni zasedbi in s skupnimi izzivi več držav. Kmetje se večkrat primerjamo z drugimi kmeti po Evropski uniji, saj imamo isti trg za naše izdelke in morali bi imeti tudi iste konkurenčne pogoje in enake možnosti prihodkov. Na to je opozarjala tudi pokojna Inka Stritar. Danes ne bomo govorili o lovu, ampak o gozdarstvu. V državah vzhodne Evrope se nekoliko starejši dobro spominjamo komunizma. Lastniki gozdov so večinoma starejši in napovedane dodatne omejitve gospodarjenja z gozdovi marsikdo razume, kot da bi se vračali v tiste čase. Čeprav še do danes niso pridobili enakih pravic, kot jih imajo lastniki gozdov v Evropski uniji. Mladi to težko razumejo in celo pri nas nekateri mislijo, da lahko nad zasebno lastnino še vedno prevlada javni interes in omejitve, brez da bi pomislili na odškodnine. Politika Evropske unije je, kot jih razumemo lastniki, usmerjanje v omejitve gospodarjenja z gozdovi. Vendar so starejši gozdovi bolj občutljivi na bolezni, počasneje rastejo, akumulirajo manj ogljika ter imajo slabši les za lesno predelovalno industrijo. Negospodarjenje z gozdom ni škodljivo le v smislu prej omenjenih razlogov, temveč je problematično tudi z vidika počasnejšega prilagajanja gozdov na podnebne spremembe. Gozdove bo treba obnoviti z bolj odpornimi drevesnimi vrstami, ki pa morajo biti hkrati primerne za lesno industrijo. Želimo si aktivno, trajnostno gospodarjenje z gozdovi, nikakor si ne želimo novih površin gozdnih rezervatov, ki bi lahko bili problem za okoliške gozdove ter hkrati velika nacionalna izguba. Od lastnikov gozdov se pričakuje seveda tudi ekosocialne storitve. Verjetno veste, da gobe rastejo le v gospodarskem gozdu. V pragozdu jurčkov ne boste našli. Od nas se pričakuje, da gozd pospravimo, ne pa da bi po žledolomu pustili, da se še kdo resno poškoduje. Družba pričakuje urejene gozdove. Ideje, da bi dobili lastniki starih gozdov nadomestilo za izpad dohodka od turizma, pa po moje niso realne, ker ne dobimo niti nadomestil za skladiščenje CO2. Pričakuje se tudi biodiverziteto. Zavarovane vrste lahko redno najdete v zasebnem gozdu. Ne verjamemo, da je veliko lastnikov gozdov, ki bi posekali drevo, v katerem ima ptica gnezdo. Divje kure ter še kakšne vrste pa izginevajo v glavnem zaradi negospodarjenja. Naši dedje so bili tisti, ki so umno gospodarili z gozdovi in mi jih negujemo za naše vnuke. Glavno vprašanje je, ali s politiko zagotavlja stabilno okolje, v katerem bomo sploh sadili za zanamce. Že zdaj se v Sloveniji verjetno polovica gozdov, ki so bili poškodovani po žledu in podlubnikih zarašča z robidovjem in grmovjem, če pa se negozdovost še poveča, bomo v gozdove vlagali le redki. Zaradi podnebnih sprememb in pričakovanj družbe moramo lastnike spodbuditi, da vlagajo v gozdove. Kot družba nikakor ne smemo pustiti, da se trenutno z gozdovi ne gospodari. Politika Evropske unije ne sme ovirati zelenega ekonomskega razvoja gozdno-lesne industrije, lastniki gozdov pa potrebujemo pomoč, da bomo lahko zagotovili številne koristi, ki jih kot lastniki gozdov od nas pričakuje družba.
These were the opening speeches, and now we come to the basics. Basic element of the forest ownership rights will be represented by the president of the Central Confederation of European Forest Owners, Mr. Sven-Erik Hammer. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rock. And thanks for the invitation, and thank you for organizing this important conference. I will now share a screen here, and I hope you see it. You see it?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, thank you very much. I will talk a bit about the basic elements of forest ownership rights. And as you said, my name is Sven-Erik Hammer. And since June this year, I'm the president of CPF. Why do we have a conference on ownership rights? It's because we see a drastic EU policy turnabout, where we go from EU policy developments that recognize the positive role of sustainable forest management and saw European forestry as an important contribution to a fossil-free future and Europe's prosperity, with emphasis on national competence and the subsidiarity principle. 2, EU policy developments that addresses forestry in an unbalanced way and creates more and more rules related to forestry and to forest management. This has caused reactions both from member states and from forest owners. The member states are questioning the Commission's distrust in their national forest policies and insists on national competence and the principle of subsidiarity. The forest owners are questioning the Commission's lack of recognition of our forest management and the proposed restrictions regarding forests and forest management. Forest owners' objections are not, and I repeat, they are not about taking care of biodiversity and the climate. They are about the policy developments related to control over forest management methods, which can have consequences on forest ownership rights. And on ongoing EU policy developments also go against the global trend that strengthened ownership rights or tenure rights in other parts of the world, leads to investments and sustainable development. Because forest owners care about climate, care about biodiversity, because we are the ones living in our forest, depending on them, taking care of them. We and our children are the first in line to be affected if the ecosystems are not kept resilient. So trust our will and ability to manage our forests. So why ownership rights? Well, both history and the present tells us that individual ownership rights are an essential institution for the prosperity and the development of society. And individual ownership rights are a fundamental societal organizational principle when building society on a constitutional democracy, on the rule of law and market economy. Imagine a society without property rights or strongly reduced property rights. What do you see in front of you? The modern concept of ownership rights in the Western world was born with the first declarations of rights in the United States in 1776 and in France in 1789. And it fell back on the ideas of natural law, meaning that there are rights and obligations that stands over temporary law enacted by states. The transition to individual ownership rights and the liberalism of the early 19th century opened up new development opportunities in society. Individual ownership rights were of fundamental importance for the technical and the industrial evolution and the economic growth to come. So why strong individual ownership of forests? Well, secure ownership rights and individual ownership rights spread on many forest owners lead to a sustainable and a diverse natural resource management. And since the time cycle in forestry is around 100 years, and the time horizon for decisions on investments in forest management thus extends over several generations, and that requires stable and secure ownership rights over time. And the production of renewable raw materials for a fossil-free bioeconomy requires that forest owners are motivated to make these long-term investments in active forest management. And if we then go into the concept, what are individual ownership rights? You can say that the short answer is ownership rights are negatively defined. And this means that the owner may do anything with the property that is not restricted in law. And this stands in contrast to positively defined rights, which are limited rights defined or described in law or agreements. Lawyers, economists, and political scientists have tried to describe what ownership rights or property rights are and what they contain. They come to about the same conclusions about the content, but they summarize it in slightly different ways. And the following here review is based on a work recently carried out at the Royal Swedish Academy of Agriculture and Forestry. And I use both the word ownership rights and property rights, and it means the same thing. The British professor in law, Tony Honoré, has thoroughly investigated the complexity of the concept of ownership rights. He is often referred to, and he summarizes the essence with 11 components: the right to possess, the right to use, the right to manage and decide, the right to the income, the right to the capital and value, right to security, right to transfer, absence of term, prohibition to harmful use, the liability of execution, and the right to regain functions. Ownership rights can roughly be divided into two parts: the right to possess and the right to use. The right to possess refers to the protection of continued ownership. This is about under which conditions the property can be taken away from the owner against her or his will. The right to use refers to the right to, after own judgment, handle the property in the way the owner wants. It consists of the right to transactions, the right to manage, and to property formation. The owner's degree of freedom within each functions appears after the legal restrictions by law are considered. The owner may do everything that is not restricted. The degrees of freedom becomes an expression of the strength of ownership rights. The right to compensation for infringements from the states, they are a fundamental part of the protection of property. And this means that the owner is compensated for the loss of property or for restrictions in the right to use the property. The right to decision-making power means the right to be able to independently decide how to manage the property. And it is a fundamental element of the right to use. Another way of describing ownership rights is in these three dimensions: freedom to use, freedom of contract, and the right to security. Yet another way of describing property rights are that without any restrictions, the owner has 100% right to decide everything concerning the property. At the other end of the scale, the owner is not entitled to decide anything and has no right to possess. But then we have left the rule of law, the democracy, and the market economy far behind us. The European Convention on Human Rights and the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union states that every natural or legal person is entitled to the peaceful enjoyment of his possessions. This means that the main rule is that the state shall refrain from intervention. But the protection of property cannot be an absolute right. Certain limited restriction must be tolerated in order to consider other people and their property, and so that society should be able to organize. So then what characterizes weak or strong property rights? That depends on the content. For example, the degrees of freedom, the level of decision-making power, the number of rules, the protection of rights, and the predictability and stability. And the content then, in turn, becomes a consequence of the ideology that prevails in society. If it is a strong state or individual freedom that is most important, if property should be owned public or by individuals, if the economy and trade should be free in a market economy or under control of central planning. So whether changes and shifts in ownership rights are positive or negative, then becomes a matter of point of view and of ideology. Based on this principal review of ownership rights, the Commission's various initiatives and the ongoing EU policy developments can be placed on the scale of how property rights could be affected. And if you look at the picture, in the light of this, it is not surprising that we have this conference here today. Finally, we forest owners in Europe, we want to go the other way. This would be better for the forest owner. It would be better for society. It would be better for the environment. It would be better for the member states and better for Europe. And it would be more in line with what the European Union was meant to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President, for the good presentation, for the overview, and on the end for the good solutions and the right way, which should be for the all citizens of the European Union, not only for the owners, but all citizens good. Once again, thank you for your presentation. We'll go to the second pillar, which is the name by the situation and the forest ownership rights and current eliminations. We have 5 speakers from the 5 countries, and we will start with Slovenia. Representative will be Nanašajo Privnika. It's from the Chamber of Agriculture and Forestry, and he is also the member of our organization. Miha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will present situation in Slovenia. To understand the current legislation, we of course have to understand how we came to these legislations and some facts about history. First, we were just a second. I have to. Now you see. First, of course, we were under Austrian Empire about more than 100 years. And what we are harvesting now is actually from those times. So we have to look at longer perspective. Then we have about 20 years of Kingdom of Yugoslavia. That was not so significant regarding the forestry development and legislation. And then little more than 40 or less than 50 years of Yugoslavia, where we have 10-year plans that were 10-year plans for forestry and the industry combined. After the war, of course, intensive post-war harvesting for new rebuilding of the economy and everything. And we had a very early ban on clear cutting in the year of 49. Of course, what is clear cutting is even now not so commonly understood, even between foresters. There are some general rules, but we will not go into that. And the basic was the mandatory sale that the private forest owners had to sell to state corporations, and directly 15% of the income went to the biological amortization. Now, after the 91 in independent Slovenia, Slovenian Forest Service was established. Then we had Forest Act just a year before. And with these solutions, we have mandatory official decisions for all measures in forests. What that means? You cannot plant a tree, you cannot make tending, of course, not harvesting without any official decisions. What is that meaning for limitations will be maybe later, but sometimes they are and sometimes not. And this is done under the law on general administrative procedures. It's the same procedures as you will get a permit for some other permits. In Slovenian constitution, property is protected and mentioned to ensure its economic, social, and environmental function. So we have to take into consideration all functions of the forests, and it is said that it is done, management is done under the conditions in a manner in which economic and other activities are pursued. So we have a special regime for forests that has a basics in Slovenian constitution, and what is then problematic is that we don't have expropriation of these limitations. We have in Article 69, can ownership rights on real estate may be limited with provision of compensation in kind of monetary compensation under conditions established by law. So this should be okay. What we have then in conflicts of use is that the hunting rights are not on the side of the forest owner, but on the side of the state. So we have concessions for hunting on private land without any income for the forest owner. We have, in general, I would say in general, limiting wood production, allowed cut due to the functions. I will go to in the detail more in that later. And we have intensive picking of forest fruits and mushrooms for the market. And forest management plans that will be later also more described by later presenter. We have 17 functions of the forests, and only part of them is compensated. Only biological diversity, Natura 2000 has a fund that can get compensations. But for other ones, we have, for example, these are not functions, what is here, but this is just some parts of use. But for example, for climate function, we have a climate function. And for climate function, the rules are quite unclear, and when or how, if it's not permitted to harvest, compensations would appear. Then with these functions, we have 3 levels of functions. The first level of function means that a function determines the means of forest management to strengthen the function. So the management is done mainly, should be focused mostly on that function. So with that, of course, come official decisions and for management in the field. And as mentioned, only one function has fund for that, and others are incorporated in official decisions from forest management plans that are mostly, the rules are not clear, how to say. So we have unclear rules on priorities of functions, when or how the function comes to the first level that would determine the management. It's mostly also human factor, personal choice of people who are doing the planning. And that then we have a lack of, or some would say with evolution of society, we are not respecting private property rights. So this is from our side, of course, lack of respecting private property rights, and some would say that this comes with evolution of society, that everyone has to take care of all the functions. And as mentioned, we have then a lack of expropriation of compensations ensured by constitution. This is in general. For example, there would be maybe just one extra example. If a forest owner wants to build a forest road, he has to get a permit or a skidding path. And if he doesn't get this permit, that someone of the stakeholders is saying no from the NGO side, there is actually no compensations for lack of management due to that. There are many reasons, but everything comes down to the point that in Slovenia we have official decisions for everything that can be made in forestry by forest owner. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Miha. I forgot to tell you on the beginning of the presentations, on the end of the presentations, you can put the questions to all the speakers. So we continue with the second presentation, which is come from Finland, from Marko Hakola, MATK, Central Union of Agriculture Producers and Forest Owners.
Thank you, and hello from Finland. As I told at the beginning, I'm driving a car. We are having a quite big meeting with forest owners today in Eastern Finland, and we are going to, for example, talk about EU forest policy. I share my screen, just a minute. I hope you can see it now.
Yes, we can see.
All right. And on sharing mode. So my name is Marko Mäkihaga. I'm the forest director in MTK, which is the Central Union of Agricultural Producers Forest Owners in Finland. I have a few slides what is the forestry in Finland, then shortly about the property rights. Actually, it's quite a lot the same thing what Sven-Erik told you about the strong property rights. And then at the end, a few examples what does it mean for Finland that have this kind of property rights. To understand the Finnish forestry and property rights, you need to understand that Finland is the country of forests. And the forests in Finland are mainly owned by private citizens, private families. We have about 600,000 forest owners, and majority of the forest land is owned by private families. The majority of the timber for forest industry is also coming from private family forests. And that's because the state owns forests mainly in northern Finland, and it's pretty cold up there, and therefore the growth of forest is not so high than, for example, in southern Finland. So Finland is the country of family forestry. And during last year, we have been especially worried about the property rights. And our worries are coming mainly from the EU legislation and EU bureaucracy, for example, the taxonomy and forest strategy and so on. And why we need to take care of property rights? Because when there is ownership, then there is somebody who takes care of the forest, because it's somebody who owns. That leads to active forest management. That leads to, for example, the possibility for forest industry to get the timber from forests. That also leads to nature conservation and so on. And in Finland, this family forestry model, it has been running over decades, over centuries. For example, my own forest was previously owned by my father, and before that, it was my grandfather's forests. And because we have been owning that forest in our family, it has led to the active forest management. So I'm able to, for example, to sell wood nowadays. If there wouldn't be strong property rights and ownership, then we are worried about that there would be this kind of thing that so to call steal and run. So just fell the trees, leave the forest alone after that, and do not take care of the regeneration and so on. And that also covers
Marko,
forestry.
Marko, could you share
Yes.
your slides with us? Always have
Yes.
page number 1.
It should be. Can you? Okay, it should be on.
Thank you. Now it works.
Can you see the slide where is written we need to take care of the property rights?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
Great. So if there wouldn't be ownership, property rights and ownership, then there would be nobody who takes care of the forests. So somebody would take the speed winds and then leave the forest. And in Finland, you also need to understand that our forests are open daily, open for everybody, because of everyman's rights. So forest owners are providing so-called ecosystem services for other citizens. For example, if you want to go to pick berries and mushrooms, it's all right. And we have extremely long tradition. As I told, my own forests were previously owned by my father, and before that my grandfather. And those things what were done about 100 years ago, they are influencing what kind of possibilities we have in forests nowadays. Now, EU legislation is going over the limit, and it's going far away over the limit. For example, the taxonomy discussion, which is coming, especially if this platform report from the environmental criterion is going to be fulfilled, and that would lead, for example, that we should left aside 20% of our forests, and that's far beyond the limit. The property rights in Finland, it's extremely strong, also in forestry. There is this kind of property rights index in the world, and I think that Finland is still on top 4 or top 5 when we speak about property rights. And that means, like Sven Erik told, if the property rights are strong, then, for example, the forest owner is able to do almost whatever he wants. Of course, for example, forest legislation is giving you some restrictions, but not so much. And these property rights, I think that they are behind the Finnish forest miracle. And I have a few slides about what does this Finnish forest miracle mean. It means that we are able to balance the forest owner's needs with the society's needs. And almost every forest owner, they are multi-objective forest owners. They want to sell roundwood, they want to sell biodiversity, they want to hunt and so on. And if we have right tools for forest owners, for example, to produce roundwood, and right tools, for example, produce biodiversity. In Finland, we have this model with voluntary forest conservation programs. It's so-called Metso program, and that gives the forest owners possibility to conserve forest, to protect the forest if he wants or she wants. There is nobody from above, for example, the state, who is saying that now you need to protect your forest. And that people should also understand, for example, in Brussels, that you won't be, if you want to achieve the optimal use of forest, you please do not come and tell our forest owners what to do. Because in that way, if we don't have the right tools, then we lose everything. Because of quite high freedom in Finland, we have been able to grow our increment. So that means that our forests are growing more and more every year. And then there is also this gap between harvesting and increment. And this means that we are able to increase the use of forest, for example, if we want to replace the fossils in the world. And that wouldn't be possible without the property rights. And my last slide tells you what has been happening during 60 years, 70 years in Finland. There is 3 different heights of green. I think those are all greens. The first shows the growing stock in the Finnish forest in 50s. The second shows what has been the total removal of wood from Finnish forest during 60 years. And the last one shows what is the growing stock nowadays. And as you can see, we have more wood in Finnish forest than it was in 50s. And at the same time, we have been harvesting at least double of the amount what were in forest in 50s. And that's because of the property rights. Because of property rights, for example, I have intensive to take care of my forest so that it's growing more and more. And now if EU, for example, through taxonomy or RED or LUCEA or whatever, would give us restriction how to use our forests, then we would finally, I am quite sure that we would lose the growth, we would lose the harvesting and so on. So we have one of the strongest property rights in the world, in Finland, and please let us keep it that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marko Hakola. I would like to go to the first representative from Lithuania, Algis Gazutis, from Forest Owners Association of Lithuania. Algis, the floor is yours.
Okay, I think that we will handle this. So thank you very much, colleagues, for organizing this important conference and topic. It is really essential. So briefly about myself, I am chairman of the National Forest and Landowners Organization in Lithuania, and we also are actively participating in CPF and ELO. In latest, I am a position of vice president. And could you switch to another slide? So I was asked to very briefly to present situation in Lithuania, but I would like to just continue what Sven Erik to land and forest owner, and we should look into not only property rights, financial property, legal, including social rights and responsibilities, but two more aspects are very essential, and I think that we shouldn't forget that. So there's a feeling of being a host in the property. It is very important. Just avoid this short-term approach as Marko just presented. And the next thing, it is very important to be emotionally attached to the property, as it is a guarantee for keeping property in good shape, and also thinking about how to pass it to children and grandchildren. So this personal attachment to the property, cultural, historical, it is also very, very important. And we understand then that when we see our very dynamic historical experience, just colleagues in the Eastern European countries, most of us have about 3 decades of the ownership rights returned back. In some countries, it is Far East, people do not want to take responsibility to be a private owners, especially when it is not only rights but responsibilities. So it is really important, those aspects. And could you go to another slide, please? Issue of the property rights, it is important. And when we start again our independence, of course, our constitution, first legal acts has been created with a respect of private ownership and a respect on protection of the private ownership rights. But lately, after 10 years almost, it was already studied by our Institute of Law of Lithuania, and it was stated that it is private property rights of forest owners are constrained disproportionately in Lithuania, and that it was due to a situation when our politicians, mostly former communists, see that the appearance of private ownership rights limit possibilities and habits which has been used very freely in the Soviet regime. So little by little, this direction, as Sven Erik show very clearly, to the less property rights and more state regulation was happening, and not only in Lithuania, but in other countries. And when we see that importance of human rights lies in the fact that the later determined by limits of state power, so we see not only in our country, but as we see now also in the European Union level, that more attempts to control, more attempts to command, and more attempts to regulate, not looking to the long-term objectives, but just pleasing a populist from environmental side, just making an experiments and putting on agenda ideas that not doing nothing in forest, it is the best thing possible, and not understanding circumstances. Now we have so-called national forest agreement process in Lithuania, so we are facing with quite interesting situations and debates with different actors in the society, which as usually do not represent big groups, but are loud, so politicians are keen to listen of those loudspeakers. So could you go to another slide, please? So in principle, restriction private property rights they are not absolute, and of course there are some reasonable balance when we're speaking about society use of the forest and private ownership lies. But anyway, in all legal basic documents, it is written and stated quite clearly that property rights can be restricted when that is done in public interest, and in cases that and under the conditions provided by law, but not by wishes, not by some ministry regulations, or not by some commission initiatives which they do not have even the right and competence to do that. Another subject to fair compensation, what is a very important, and third, being paid in good time for their loss, which occurs if restrictions are applied. So could you go to another slide, please? So, and it is already mentioned, and so I do not go deeper, but private property rights in EU, it is really clearly stated in Article 17, first part of EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, and Article 1 of the first protocol. So next slide, please. And few examples how, and I raise a question, how private as a Lithuanian private forest, and you can, colleagues, raise the same question in Germany, in Finland, in Slovenia, in Latvia, or other countries. So, for instance, very evident violation of private property rights, it is in case of hunting. I'll go deeper just in few minutes. So the use of forest or land for hunting, it is expropriated under the current legislation. The right to divide property by co-owners, it is disproportionately constrained. In protected territories is almost no possibilities. And we have in Lithuania some limit if one part become less than 5 hectares in the industrial forest, it is not allowed to divide this. And keeping in mind that we have 250,000 forest owners with a population of not full 3 million. So it is really quite a restriction to construct up more manageable land structures. So then legitimate expectations for the preserving the value of equity investment. I mean that when we see forest and land not only as a source of raw material, but it is a real estate. It is our green savings and green bank. So very often it is changes due to restrictions when the property value it is decreasing, it is ignored, And it is a result to a situation what Marco just very clearly mentions, that when landowners, forest owners see that restrictions are coming, so they try to take as much as possible and leave it, because it is no possibility to change by a single person, even for organizations, this tendency. So this situation, assets are significantly depreciated. It is really not good for continuation of the ownership and the long-term investments. And of course, another example, we also have every man's right to visit state and private forest, but also it is no responsibilities for outside visitors to behave in proper way. So owner has right to collect this all rubbish dumped by outsiders, and if not, so severe penalties are applied, not for someone, but particularly in land or forest owner. So next slide, please. And of course, if overall environmental policy, it is direct to the situation to protect forest from its owner, and that all tendency to restrict more and more management. And just to mention that over 65% of territory are under the law for protected territories. We have so-called nature carcass, which alone covers 65% of territory of Lithuania, not speaking about 46 types of different reserves and different other protected territories. Very important thing, it is with infrastructure lines, take electricity or others. So current due to current legislation for users of the private land for the infrastructure lines, they do not require to ask owner to permit to cut forest in this line, do not require ask forest to permit to change land use even, and no real compensation when such regulation are issued by law. Next slide, please. And maybe, as many colleagues ask about hunting, so few more words about hunting. For landowners recently in Lithuania, it is zero rights to use or rent own property for hunting activities. Only opportunity foreseen in legislation, it is forbid hunting activities in his or her property. But in such a case, damages by animals are not compensated by state or by hunters. So, and if a hunter is landowner, so he has an opportunity to hunt, to experience it, this hunting activities in his property, only in case if a hunting club was use his land allows this to accept him or her as a member of club, but you should pay at that case entrance fee for the club, and clubs are setting quite very high, tens of thousands fee for this case. And in the legislation, it is written that that opportunity landowner, forest owner has if he owns more than 15 hectares in one cadastral piece. And later you will see that our forest owners in average has 3.4 hectares, and it is not in one cadastral piece because it is another unit. So it is almost impossible to fulfill those conditions. So next slide, please. And probably someone will ask, maybe owner can establish a private hunting club. Yes, in legislation is written if you have 1,000 hectares of the in one piece compact area, then you can. But how to reach that if it is not allowed to rent for hunting, it is not allowed to organize this private hunting area by several members, only by one. So it is really then average maximum allowed size for ownership in agricultural land. It is 300 hectares and maximum 500. And in the forest land, in the restitution process was returned not more than 150. And now we have a limitation that owner, doesn't matter company or person, can own not more than 1,500 hectares of forest altogether. So it is really impossible. So next slide, please. So summarizing this short presentation, I think that what we need, sustainable human relations which lead to sustainable solutions in forest. So thank you for your attention, and I think that we can discuss answering your questions later on. Thank you very much.
Mr. Agis Gajuti, thank you very much for your presentation. We can see from the history fact that we have the same writers who write the law of the huntings in Slovenia and in Lithuania. The only difference is that we have minimum 2,000 hectares for the hunting. We have 1,000, the same for the owners, 15 hectares. So I think these people went to the same school, but I will not mention it because it was mentioned already today, which is influence on our property rights in both of the countries. I would like to give the floor to the fourth speakers. He came from French, Dagdual de la Satte, Pennsylvania. It's French Federation of Forest Owners, Mr.
Yeah, does everybody hear me?
Yes, we hear you very much.
Perfect. So thank you for the opportunity to express regarding the property rights in France. I'm Dagdual de la Satte, board member of France Silva 44. It's a local emanation of the National Private Forest Owners Organization, France Silva. And in the second part, I'm also a private forest owner. So in France, if we go back on the history of property rights, legislation is relatively ancient. It dates from 1804 and is inherited from the Code Civil in France that states that property is the right of disposing and using the content in the most absolute manner on the condition not to make a forbidden use by law or rules. From what has been said by the preceding speakers, we can estimate that in France we are relatively lucky because we have the right of managing contracts, we have the right of managing hunting, we have the right of managing our property with certain limits regarding the laws or the rules that have superseded all these property rights. They have been superseded because modern rules, citizenship, biodiversity usage and awaitings have led to certain insurances that have legal obligations to cover risks linked to the property rights. It has also introduced forest management rules, usually applicable over 25 hectares by default, but that can also be run under a voluntary basis. For example, PSGs, Management Simple Plan, RTGs, Typical Management Ruling, or CBPS, Forestry Code for Best Practices. They all need to provide exhaustive documentation and in a certain manner has a setup cost. And we'll see a bit later that the setup cost is the biggest difficulty that we can have in France, because as many other countries, forest owners usually have relatively small properties. In France, there's approximately 16 million hectares that are divided with 3 to 4 million owners. That means that a forest owner has approximately 3.5 hectares per property. And it has a cost to set up all the management rules that is associated to the right of using his property. We have other regulations such as harvest operation declarations and at different administrative levels. It can be local, regional, or national, depending on the nature and the size of operations. It's this insanity that can give forest owners the impression that he is not totally free of managing his property rights, because there's always a level where he has to do a declaration or state rulings that will impose him to always have declarations to make. Administrative authorization are also needed inside operations regarding forestry zones. It can be plantations, renewals, or any operation that operate inside forestry zones. Yet in France, we have cons and pros regarding the property rights. On the con side, countries. For example, we all have international regulations, such as Ramsar, the Wetlands International Importance, or the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. We also have, at the European level, the Natural 2000 application of bird and habitat directives. France has partially been responsible also of these directives inside the European nation. And more locally in France, we have several levels of regulations. For example, the NIEF, National Natural Parks and Reserves, the ZPS, which is the Natura 2000 National Application of the Directive, the ZSC and ISAYC, which are Natural 2000 National Application of Habitat Directives, the RNCSF, National Reserves for Wildlife Hunting, which prevent any hunting operations inside these reserves. And last, the classified or registered sites that can be historical monuments or can be other classified sites for biodiversity or for natural protection. On a regional basis, we have another level of regulation, which can be regional natural parks, reserves. It can also be ZICOs, important zones for bird conservation. And at an even more local level, we find ENS, natural spaces, sensible natural spaces protection, APB for biotopic prefectorial rulings. That's, we'll say, a form of state regulation on a local basis. We have EBCs, natural and forest zones, on urbanistic classifications, which in France is named PLU. All these levels introduce new rules. Each time it's new rules that will impact the property rights of each owner in France, and will have administrative counterparts that a forest owner needs to know and keep in mind any property project to be laid in France. That means that there's no compensation for all these multi-level regulations that will impact directly the forest owners. Yet one of the main chances that we have in France, and one of the pros for the property rights, is that we have a more favorable legislation that can be associated to PSGs. If a forest owner sets up a PSG, a management plan, even if it can be a constraint because it needs to exchange, validate its content with the administration, the PSG brings a real administrative security to the forest owner, who is sole responsible for setting it up by taking consideration supranational and national legislation that is applicable, but it also frees any obligations in his property management. It clears local, regional regulations, allowing after validation of the PSG to process to any property rights with fewer controls. There can be one exception that can be considered is when there's expropriation that is led by different objectives. In this case, expropriation will be made with a compensation for the forest rights, for the property rights that have been finally expropriated. On the preceding speaker, there was a main problem that was stated, for example, for electricity lines. In France, we have also communication lines. All these usage of property rights need legally in France to be compensated. In the reality, in the day-to-day usage, we can see that the more often possible, we have infringements to these expropriation rights that can occur, but the law has planned normally that each forest owner that is expropriated should normally be compensated for this expropriation. So it allows forest owners to use this property as stated by the plan, with possibility to change the planning period in case of non-forecasted events. For non-forecasted events, it can be forest damage, it can be burning, it can be forest fires, storms. Any non-forecasted events can introduce a regulatory option to change the planning period inside the PSGs. PSG is a unique mechanism in Europe, as it has been led in France by the private forest owners via the CRPF. The CRPF is the regional property of forest management and leads and allows finally all private forests owners to have a representation and a form of legal visibility for their management plans. It also guarantees to forest owners a secure work ground for their property rights. There's a second pro that is associated to property rights, is that there are a lot of funding and incitations to promote forest activities in France. There are incitations with good management and practices. They can include subventions and other fundings for protecting biotopes, setting up management plans, protecting wildlife or wetlands. And these fundings will occur at different levels. It can be a federal European fundings, national fundings, regional fundings, or even more local fundings. We also have private funding that is coming to life since approximately 3 to 4 years ago, and which can be a form of compensation that can help forest owners to go forward. There are also funding for biotop changes to adapt to climate change. In France, we have the label bas carbone, which is CO2 related. We have also declining trees and parcel change to allow forest owners to be aware of climate change and change eventually the forest he has regarding declining trees. And finally, we have a national plan, which is called Plan France Relance, which is ending at the end of this year, end of December 2021, and which has helped also forest owners to rehabilitate agricultural surfaces, or even to accompany declining tree and parcel change. We have a certain management in flexibility. For example, harvest program adaptation, consulting and support when a PSG or a CBBS has been deployed. And finally, excuse me, we have a strong collective and associative support with numerous of associations such as the CNPF, the National Private Forest Owners Representation, the CRPF, the regional one, France Silva, which is the Private Foresters Association, France Bois Forêt, forest cooperatives, and many other associative support that help engage and manage the property rights for all the forest owners. Thanks a lot. It's the end of my slide. Sorry, it's not as furnished as the other speakers, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. We are really happy with your presentation in French. We will continue to the last speaker. It's our neighbor country. It's Croatia. I'd like to give the floor to Zdenko Bogovic, president of the Croatia Union Private Forest Owners Association. Zdenko, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello?
Yes.
Do you see me?
Yes.
Is it everything fine? Presentation is in front of you?
Yes,
Okay.
everything is okay.
Thank you very much that we got a chance to participate in this really important event, especially for us from the east part of Europe, but to see all these stories from the west. And I will just say about the Sweden or Finland forest that is somehow dream for us in this part of Europe. And Sven, it was really nice to hear your introduction for today. And as I'm the last one in this presentation, I change a little bit because I don't want to repeat almost the same stories what we had from previous presenters, especially from Slovenia, and this for hunting, because our property rights in the forest sector, in private forests in Croatia, are close to the zero. But I will upgrade with something what is important, just because of limitation. The first page is just a few things about the private forest in Croatia. It's just the facts, nothing specially. So that we are weak because small property or surface of the forest, and mostly that forests are for firewood for the rural people. But in the same time, we have extremely big potential in the management because of habitat of that forest, because most of that forest are abandoned. What is a good opportunity for the future and the forest. And private forests in Croatia are captured by the over-regulated laws in any part of the forest. It means everything what we are doing is obligatory. It's done by the state, and of course it's from the past. But on the end of the story is that somehow the forest owners are not owners of that forest. And we say that we have just obligation, but all goodness of our forest, socially, economically, ecologically, is for society. And we have just obligation on penalties and so on. And we have a few things what are even more than in the other states. It's, for example, just that you have your forest more than 20 hectares. You have to pay taxes from 5 to 10% of the uncut value of the wood for local government. It's giving us immediately in the position that we are not let's say concurrent on the market. Some let's say investigation in the forest in Croatia done by the nature protection people are showing really amazing let's say connections with our forest with birds. It means that goodness from the forest is giving so high goodness in the biodiversity of the birds. That is just the facts, and it's good to show you because almost everything is full in here in this part of Europe. But you will see in next slides what will happen with this. We are almost the first with all these amazing figures, but in the same time, somehow we are punished on the way that I will focus just on the examples. I think it's good for you because what you are seeing on this slide is what's going on from the 2018. We do this, it's obligatory from the 2018 because of the Natura 2000 directive of birds and of course directive of habitat. And you see the amount of the wood volume what we have to leave in the forest because of this Natura 2000 restriction. I mean through these directives what I already mentioned. And when you these are example 2, and when you calculate this over the surface, you will see this is example for Croatia for the private forests. Croatia is cutting around 6 million of cubics, and 1.8 is this reduction to restriction through implementation in our forest management plans. That is extremely high value for us. I mean, it's not just point financial part, it's a point that it's absolutely will make depopulation in the areas where the forests are existing. It's not towns, almost all these stories are happening in the areas where the best forest in Croatia. And of course, in the chain of what is coming from the forest, the wood industry is going to be reduced. We do some estimation, it's almost 30% of wood industry will be lost, and all the others in the chains will be absolutely destroyed. And for the conclusion, this is really, really important for us because we see through this application of this, of course, of this property rights, first of all, and through this negative impact, we, after 2.5 centuries, here in Croatia, we have to change the management in the forest. And we have to leave our let's say, knowledge, how we create all this time, our forest on the best way. It means when we apply this, what restriction now and what we are doing already, we will leave, let's say, our sustainable forest management knowledge on the way that we will lose absolutely age classes, we will lose the thickness classes, and so on and so on. And on the end of the story, we will just apply this reduction from the nature protection, and not our knowledge in the forest that we will have this really nice forest. That is giving us a right to say that this part of Europe will go to the primary forest. And in the primary forest, of course, you will not have this kind of biodiversity as we have up to now. It's nice to face that because it's a really critical moment to say to each other that this populism over the Europe has to stop. Otherwise, for example, this part of Europe is not just Croatia. It's a few states will just have extremely depopulation, and of course, we no need the funds to compensate our loss in the forest. We want to just live with the nature on the way how we lived before, because we in this process we really secure three pillars. What all the time we are repeating, that is economical, social, and of course this ecological part where it belongs to, of course, biodiversity. And on the end of the story, we will, of course, again, I will repeat, we will again lose something what we create more than 200 years, because from our side, we put almost everything what is the best in the forest in Natura 2000. We are we have 37% of our surface is Natura, and that is something what we will try to change because it's for us is going to be disaster. And that's why I switch a little bit my presentation, because I could repeat all these laws and so on and so, but already colleagues from the Slovenia, they had almost the same situation. just a few things are changed. Okay, and let's have a sustainable future with this small seed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with you that in the forest is no place for the populism, and we must take care for our forest as forest owners. We came to the end of the presentations. Now we have a time for the questions to the president, and I will give the floor. You can raise the hand, and we will glad if you represent yourself, represent the organization you representing, and then you put the question to who you put the question.
Stane Bergant.
Stane Bergant was the first. Stane, the floor is yours.
Look, we saw from this presentation that the management and the strategies in different European countries are very, very different. And this new EU forest strategy, which is coming, and EU will have more and more influence on our management plan in our countries. I would ask a question. Yeah, how he sees this process, if this process will lead also to the more and more equal property rights in EU countries. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very good. And it was a very good question. And I think the answer that a more centralized regulation on forestry in Europe would benefit countries that don't have so strong property rights. I understood the question was like that, and then my answer is no, I think, because there is so much difference in Europe. It's difference in how we manage our forests. It's different how the forest looks like. It's different how the forests are owned. And I think that the EU must respect these differences, because trying to centralize it just won't work. And that's why member states have not given the competence in forestry and forest management issues to the EU. That must be decided on national level. And the thing we all forest owners should do to strengthen property rights is to talk about the need to strengthen it from the position where each country are today. So I think that is the work that needs to be done. In each country, from each conditions, need to try to strengthen the property rights, because that leads to a more sustainable development for the whole of the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd like to give the floor to Jan Sonnegaard.
Yes, thank you for some very, very interesting presentations and worrying presentations as well. It showed very clearly how different and both the content and the enforcement of private property rights is in the different European countries, and especially it seems that there are very weak position for the forest owners in the Eastern European countries. My question is to the representatives from the East European country. If you look at it from a national perspective, that means not the new EU regulation, but if you look at the national level, is there any development in how the property rights is questioned or imposed in your country? Is they weakened or is they strengthened, or how do you see the development from the last 10 years, and what do you expect from the future? I think that would be a very interesting question to hear your predictions about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will put the floor to all three Eastern countries. We can say first we're going to be Slovenia, Miha Koprivnik, to answer this question.
Well, we have later Dr. Liviu with us, who also had an article about the development of private property rights in the last 20 years. And that showed, maybe he can comment on his own article, but there were really little developments on this side. What I can say for a Slovenian forest owner organization is that we have now put one complaint to the Constitutional Court regarding these rights, and that slowly I think that things will change, but really very, very slow. Let's leave it. So the next one.
The next one, I will put the floor to Mr. from Lithuania, Agis Žutis. Is still with us?
Thank you. So Jan, answering to your question, good question. I looked to this changes on property rights strengthening or weakening as a function of several variables. First of all, it is how much funding is getting environmental NGOs for different projects, because they need to implement projects and they do not need to have ownership to deal and to negotiate for the project implementation. So more funding it is going to environmental different projects, more initiatives to limit private ownership rights. Another variable is more intensive different institutional investments in our Nordic and Western Europe private forest companies investing in our countries, more keen politicians to limit this process. And then in this aspect, then it is restrictions are coming first of all for national actors, for forest owners, for companies, and international actors can avoid as usually this. So it is two main issues. And of course, we try to at least in Lithuania, defend and protect the ownership rights, and especially important is dialogue of national agreement on forest, which is going on nowadays. So I see very, very clearly that there are those socialism type of politicians and activists from NGOs who would like to have no private ownership or ownership commanded by their own interest. So yeah, but it is a situation. And finalizing this, colleagues, I think that we need not only to talk, but put those cases into the court. And if some countries already have court cases, legal cases where winning it is happening, so it is TPF yellow role, it is spread as much as possible to other countries to use these arguments to defend our ownership rights back in the national level. So thank you. Hopefully I respond to the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Zdenko, do you think that you have to say something? Because
just a few sentences. I fully agree with Algis. It's almost the same story with us, because this populism in this extremely growing of the NGOs with the funds really are doing a lot of trouble with us. But as we are states in transitions, our decision makers, somehow they don't see that we have to change in the place. I mean, as a member state, and they signed a lot of document in Brussels what harm us in our parts, and that in our case is a forest sector and wood sector. But I can say that we are so happy that we are part of this story, and even this event today is something in our way how we can be faced in front of decision makers. And in our case, we had extremely a lot of results in institutions, and we are partnered there, and we changing things on the let's say yearly level, but it needs time because we are, as Algi say, from socialism, maybe 20, 30 years will be in position as Denmark, for example. Okay.
Denko, I hope that I don't come old as you, that it come to some changes, but as I can say, Slovenia have 20% of this property rights. It's on the lowest in the Europe, not in the European Union, in the Europe. And I can only say, Denko, I think because we come in the past from the same country, they don't want to see. Not that they cannot see, they don't want to see, because we mentioned them a lot of times and they don't want to see. And that's why Slovenia decided by the law to change some things. The next speaker is Natalie Hufnagel.
Thank you very much, but I think Jan wanted to have a reply. No? You're fine? Okay, I thought you wanted to say something. Thank you very much for organizing this conference, and good morning, colleagues and friends. I have a twofold question. So number one, property rights as they are described in the Charter on Fundamental Rights, not only on European level, but also on United Nations level, they do not only apply for forests. So they are a general basic right. So my question to all presenters, so also to our colleagues from Finland and France, do the same kind of limitations that we see in forestry also apply to other sectors, meaning in the economy, in industry? Do you see the same development of expropriation? So I think it was very clearly presented by Algis. That this is not any longer based on property rights. So this is a kind of our really arbitrary movement that is going on there. And so this would be my interest, whether this is something that is also kind of extrapolated to other sectors. And then a very concrete question when it comes to level playing fields, and I want to take as an example bioenergy, because their forestry is confronted with an increasing number of sustainability requirements. Are in your countries the same sustainability requirements applied for other renewable energies, meaning solar, wind, thermal, whatever? So that would be my two questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The representative from Finland and from France, who's going to take the floor first?
Maybe,
I'm going to start with the first question that was relative to other sectors that are under regulations. Here in France, we can say that there are many regulations in many sectors. If you take enterprise level regulations, we do have a severe level of regulations, of legislations, even if expropriation is more limited, because France has a model where normally industries, enterprises are located all together in specific zones, in specific management zones dedicated for industries or for enterprises. So regulation is probably existing, but is less harmful, I would say, in comparison with forest owners, which will have expropriation processes regarding the property may be linked to infrastructures, to roads, to electrical lines, or any other problematics that need to include expropriations. On the second question that was related, sorry, I got a pit hole. The second question was regarding?
It was on the red too, whether other bioenergy or renewable energies are also exposed to the same kind of sustainability requirements.
Well, here in France, there is effectively a sustainability requirements that is linked to any sort of bioenergy. You cannot implement where you want. Could it be aeolian or even solar energy? You cannot put it anywhere you want to put it in. And there is also often a massive protest of citizenship regarding the bioenergy implementations. For example, in France, we have had several problems regarding the wind and solar implementation of new sites because it's not on a regulatory basis, but it's more on a citizenship and organizations, ONGs are typically against all these projects, even if they want these projects to be made on a local and national basis. When it comes to the real implementation, there are often problems regarding the possibility and the sustainability of each of the projects locally.
Thank you very much.
But maybe Luc Bouvarel, which has also his hand that is set up, may wish to complete because he has more visibility of the French situation than I can have, for example.
Okay, I would like to
from Finland.
I would like to ask yes, from Finland, Marco. Akola,
yes.
Did you hear the question or?
Yes, yes, I heard. Shortly, I think that there is more pressure to property rights when we are talking about forestry than to other sectors, and quite many think that forests are in some way common property, and everybody should decide what to do with the forests. So not that kind of discussion what to do with houses and other kind of property things. So only forestry is having that kind of pressure in Finland.
Thank you very much. Miha, I want to say also the Slovenia position the same
is the same that the Finland said the other sectors don't have such limitations regarding the sustainability than forestry. We are mostly limited.
Thank you. I don't know if Luc Bouvarel is with us. He wants to say something on this theme, or he have a question for us.
Yeah. I have a question, and I can give something about this this question of Natalie. First, for the question of Natalie, I think in France it's quite the same thing. The solar and the wind energy are less troubled by the government and the people. Less than very often on local position, there is some people don't want wind or solar energy near their houses, but the rule and the regulation is less than bioenergy by wood. About one question, I make a big relation between the market and the industry organization and structuration and the property right of the owners. In France, we don't have a very structured organization industry of wood. And so we have on many areas some difficulty with the property right because we don't have the direct utilization of the wood near the wood production. Not the same thing in Finland or in Sweden. And I would like to know if it is the same position in other country as the speaker speak about this morning. And the other thing, I would see this meeting this morning may be showing to the EU level that the reality of the position on the forest owner are quite very different from country to countryside, and that they must understand and make more attention to this difference.
Thank you very much, Luke. Now, Luke put the question to everybody. I would like that Argis was already prepared to answer. Argis, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I still want to answer Natalie Hufnagel, because Natalie, you have asked to answer to your question all of presenters. So listen, Natalie, I would like to raise two questions. First, of course, forestry it is more regulated, as forestry it is a turnover of the business is not very huge. For instance, altogether, state and private forest sector in Lithuania, maybe turnover it is 1/3 only for the grain producers annual turnover. So that means that forestry is on agenda because it is much easier to attack and it is visibly more easy to attack. But
Argis, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Yeah, no, Natalie said that yes, because answering to her. But Natalie, what is interesting, and you should keep in mind that we in the Eastern European countries are in situation when ownership it is returned back, and now it is redistribution of ownership. So in these sectors where redistribution of ownership from owners who receive ownership to new owners already occur, this tension it's over. But in these sectors, like instance in forestry, where many forest owners are object and target for the bigger corporations, businesses, so they see it as an advantage that this pressure on ownership exists, because then small forest owners has no choice just to sell their properties to a bigger business, and they already defend. Because if you look, see in our countries, big corporations who are purchasing forests are very silent and do not speaking at all about ownership rights or any other issues dealing with the regulation. Because as understood, more or less, they are okay what is going on. And regarding energy, renewable energy, so sustainable criteria of sustainability in our country at least are equal to all sources of energy. It doesn't matter it is a biofuel or it is solar or it is wind energy. And wind energy faces with a big troubles from environmentalists, because being a windmill, they considering as something terrible for the landscape. So it is a very, very difficult to agree where to build this. So I hope Natalie respond to your question.
Okay. Agis, thank you very much. This was the last question. Now we put the floor to the answers, and then we're going to continue with the second part of the conference. So somebody wants to answer to Luke? Luke, it looks like they scare of you.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
If you can repeat your question, maybe.
I put the question that I think there's a huge connection between the market and the industry organization and structuration and the property right in the different countries.
You want to answer? Now, the only thing of the answer, I agree with you, Luke, that Europe should look at the different property rights and maybe continue to take care of the owners that they come to, at least on the medium or some level who is respectable from them to they can work on everything.
Rob, just a sentence about that. We started about 10 years ago in France to try to interest the forest owner to the wood industry, and we have actually some big owner coming, put money in the industry wood, and that changed the discussion in the chain value. And I think it's quite the things we can see in Finland or in Sweden, but we don't have such thing in France or other countries, South country or East country. And that may be why we have a so big difference between property right and because the economic point of view and the market is very important for the national level.
I agree.
Maybe I can just make a very short comment there, because we
yes,
and I agree with Luke, and it comes back on the more basic questions around property rights, because also the industry needs to have stable conditions to develop, and if you have lack of that, if you have lack of stability, you won't get investments either. So it's connected, and the key issue is to have strong and secure property rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe I would just add that really we must look at the whole sector. As Luke said, the stronger the sector, the stronger is then also the interest to actively manage the forest. In countries where we export most of our wood to Austria, we have less strong wood-based industry, and of course we are not so strong together. And from that, we defend harder with all limitations are pushed to us. So I agree with Luke that this development of green economy that EU is talking about should help us in getting more actively managed forests.
Thank you very much. We, as the moderator, we are already 20 minutes late, but not because of the questions and the speakers, because we start a little bit late, and we would like to continue with the second part of the conference. I give the floor to the Jože Mori from Slovenian Forest
Slovenian Forest Service.
Slovenian Forest Service. You represent Slovenian forest management in the context of the new EU policy. Mr. Mori, you are still with us?
Okay. So I hope you hear me, and first warm regard also from my side. I'm working in Slovenia Forest Service as head of the sector of measuring the forest, and I'm still also a board member of Forest Owner Association Slovenia. Maybe my presentation will be a little different than other. I just want to shortly present a concept of forest management in Slovenia to you with some questions. Maybe you get some additional pictures of our forest management. Another, please, Micha. As you probably know, Slovenia is one of the most forested countries in Europe. Covered 80% of entire Slovenia territory is covered by the forest. The forest is an essential element of Slovenian landscape. Another, please. We have very diverse forest structure in our forest with high amount of large diameter trees, high growing stop, also annual increment, and very big diversity of tree species, about not exactly 71 tree species, our species are in the Slovenian forest. Another our forests are mainly privately owned, especially after our process of denationalization, in which private owners get another 20% of forest area. Now we have about more than 70% of forests are private, and with really small average forest estate. So we have more than 400,000 forest owners in Slovenia, with very different groups of forest owners, with farmers, big forest owners, forest owners who live in the cities, abroad, and so on. Also, we have about 29% public forest, state, and communities. Another, please. Forest management in Slovenia has also a long tradition. Forest management plans with integrated principle of sustainability were made about 250 years ago, but significant headway towards close to nature forest management was made in the 70s. Another, please. In 1993, new forest law was elaborated, and since then forest management is based on three main principles which should be respected in all forests, in all ownerships. So there are sustainability, close to nature management, and multi-purpose forest management. Another, if all forests are managed by close to nature principles, and that's meaning that forest structure and tree species is adapted to the site conditions, respected also climate changes. Also in this forest, natural regeneration is very successful. About 90 to 95 of forest area is regenerated naturally. Another, please. Our forest provides also many goods and services. That's why, besides the sustainable preservation of forests, forest management should also ensure sustainable use of all goods and services. Another, please. We're also following approach that nature conservation and biodiversity preservation is integrated in the forest management. I think we are we have a largest amount of nature 2,000 sites. They cover about 37% of the country. In the forest are almost 70% of Natura 2000 sites, and Natura 2000 covers about 45% of entire forest area, which is, I think, the highest percent in Europe. Slovenia forest management plans include guidelines and measures for nature conservation and biodiversity preservations. Forest management plans are also plans for managing Natura 2000 sites in the forest. Another, please. Another important characteristic of Slovenia forest management is ecosystem approach, with wildlife as an integral part of forest ecosystem, which cause a lot of problems. Probably we will hear about this day. And natural regenerations also because of red deer density in with large carnivore density and so on. Another, please. All the principles and approaches are implemented through the hierarchically organized forest and game management planning system, which includes different levels. We have strategic plans prepared at regional scale, at a tactical levels, forest management plans to forest management units, and following direction from tactical plans, detailed silvicultural plans are prepared for forest compartments when concrete measures is prescribed. So we have three level of forest management planning. Another, please. With detailed silvicultural plans are prepared all the measures. The silviculture detailed plans are basis for district forester and forest owner who together decide about necessary measures such as tree cuttings, tending works, and so on. Another, please. So, with for the planning and for all the measures in the forest, we need also strong public forestry service for coordinate management of forest in Slovenia, and Slovenia Forest Service is hierarchically organized and employ over 600 foresters and other specialists. So, what is the forest management contribution to biodiversity conservation objective in Slovenia? Biodiversity preservation is an important management objective, and forest management in Slovenia significantly contribute to biodiversity conservations. We see the results, which are not bad, and naturalness of forest stands in major development phases prevail, and the amount of dead wood, as you see in forest, is on average around 20 cubic meters per hectare. And naturalness of tree species composition is also high, and so on, as you see with that result. Another, please. So I would like to emphasize that forest management in Slovenia already implements all three main pillars foreseen for forests by new green European legislation. And another, please. if we see some points of new EU forest strategy, I ask myself, and we can ask what else we can do not to damage forestry and wood industry, and especially property rights of forest owners. And in that case, I can say we are already more European than European Union itself. And the last one, some questions. Another, please. Is it proper, or whether maximizing carbon sinks really ensured the multifunctional role of forest, their conservation, and reduces the risk of forest management? This is the first question. And second, is it really necessary to ensure 10% of strictly protected forest area also in countries with high ecological standards of forest management, which has integrated biodiversity preservation, close to nature forest management in all forests? We have feared that we, after that we about 9% of our forest, which is completely not necessary with such a forest management as we have. And the third question is, should close to nature forest management be equal to sustainable forest management, or should be it close to nature forest management should be as a special form of sustainable forest management aimed to nature conservation and biodiversity preservation? And the last question is, will you finally ensure financial mechanisms to support measures in privately owned forest for biodiversity preservation and climate change adaptation and mitigation? I think Slovenia is one of the rare, or maybe only country who still now ensure some national financials for this things. And finally, another piece. Yes. So today I did not speak much about directly about proper rights, but I hope you understand the point. So thank you for attention, and I'm here for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jože Mori. We will put the questions and the answers in the end. We will go to the second speaker, potential impact on the EU forest strategy, the property rights and the forest management. Will be represented by Dr. Liviu. Thank you very much. It's from the University of Romania, if I am correct.
Yes, thank you for this great event. It's really a pleasure to hear all this presentation on a topic that I was really involved in research. I'm coming from Romania, a country which shares similar backgrounds like some of the countries that have been presented today. And the issue of property rights, it was very interesting for us as part of a research group in this Faces Map project. I put here 3 research outputs on the specific issue of property rights in private forestry, also to acknowledge the contribution of different national forest experts that have answered to these questions. So we managed to provide 2 articles, one showing the level of property rights and the diversity of property rights across Europe at the level of 2015, and then the changes that occur between 90s and 2015.
Can you just maybe go on the bottom of the screen and push the reading mode? Now it's Zoom has changed something, and you must push on the bottom, not the presentation, but the reading mode. And then on the bottom of the screen on your PowerPoint, you have that presentation mode. That is the now it's okay.
Now it's working.
Yeah.
You can see the second slide. Yeah. Okay. Sorry for this. So here you see the national forest experts who contributed to this issue of property rights analysis across Europe in these 2 articles that I mentioned. And also you can see also that UNEC and FAO has launched recently in 2020 a book that actually addressed this issue of forest ownership in the European context. So first I want to provide some general overview of the forest ownership structure across Europe. EU forest strategy acknowledges this diversity of ownership. They made an estimation of about 60 million private forest owners across Europe. 60% of the forest across Europe is considered to be in private ownership. We have from EFI a map showing this diverse share of private ownership across Europe, and this is also probably an indicator why the property rights different across Europe, because this share might differs also in different countries. One insight that I want to provide here is that our studies pointed to this diversity of forest ownership across Europe, not only from the property rights perspective, but for other issues like we still don't have an uniform definition of the legal forms of ownership. Some countries have their own interpretation of what is public and private entities. For example, regarding municipal forest, there are diverse approaches in the national legal statistic of the apartments to a public or a private entity. We see also a change in the social characteristic of the owners. The so-called share of absentee or urban forest owners is increasing in some of the Western and Nordic countries. These forest owners that adhere to, let's say, non-traditional forest management approaches. While on the other side, we heard also from Lithuania, we have it in Romania, there are a lot of forest investment companies that perceive an opportunity to buy land in large forest estate in former socialist countries. We see also the development of a new form of ownership, the so-called the third sector, which is represented by philanthropic or charitable non-governmental organizations, these NGOs, that actually started to buy land with the main purpose to protect the forest only for biodiversity purposes. And we have the issue of the forest fragmentation of forest property, which is common to many countries, and the restitution of forest in former socialist countries have increased this share of fragmentation across Europe. So the main message here is that we see the diversity, but we also see some changing ownership patterns that might have a significant implication for the provision of forest biomass and ecosystem services. But it was pointed here, and I'm really happy to see in the first presentation that Dr. Hammer approached this issue of different framework to analyze property rights and put his own scale from 0 to 100. We use the same approach in our articles. We use the most common framework used for the analysis of property rights in resource management, that one from Schlager and Ostrom, which divides property rights across 5 types of rights: access, withdrawal, management, exclusion, and alienation. For each of these rights, we address questions. There were 37 questions in form of indicators, let's say. And we look in the legislation. Each national expert look in its own national legislation to see what is the provision for that indicator. If the owner is allowed to enter the property, if he is allowed to take mushroom from its own forest, or to take timber, and so on. All these indicators are provided in the article. And then we rank these on this scale. There are situations on rights are fully restricted, on owners have no freedom of decision making, and there are situations where owners have full degree of freedom in this decision making, like this 100 scale. Most of the situations are somewhere in between, and we created this framework for analysis and in order to be able to compare this across Europe. And this is the result that you might be aware of, and this summarize a bit the entire discussion of this morning, that we still have countries in which there is a strong adherence to governmental norms and regulation in forest management. Most of these countries are from this former socialist bloc. You see here in the ranking that Romania, Slovenia, Croatia are more or less similar in the distribution of rights. We see some of the Baltic countries that moved a bit in a more degree of freedom, but still the Western country, let's say like this, they put more freedom, they give more freedom to forest owners, and they put a higher emphasis on these voluntary market-based instruments in forest management. So this points to this diversity of property rights. This map is at the level of 2015. Since then, there have been some changes, and we have to address this now in the framework of the new forest strategy. One point of this diversity that has been mentioned already, it's that this diversity of national legal frameworks is reflected in the free market fairness. I heard here in this morning that owners would like to have the same competitive conditions like other owners. And also it's an issue of enforcement. This has been also touched a bit in the first presentation, which was excellent. But just to point here, the legality of the similar forest management operation varies largely across Europe. A picture that you can see here, it's sustainable forest management in one country, and it might be even hard law infringement in other countries. And of course, if the state decides to go more on regulation, then it has to enforce this regulation. And we face in many countries these enforcement problems. The legislation looks great, but in practice we might have a problem. Of course, owners have to face higher administrative and bureaucratic costs, and there are many risks to illegalities that are also shown, for example, in different national risk assessments. So from this perspective, we have to consider the need to have more similar competitive conditions across Europe. In respect to the changes, it was mentioned here that we analyze also the changes. Again, the comparison has been done between the legal situation in the 90s and the level of property rights at the level of 2015. We see that former socialist countries have an increased level of property rights, even though it is not very strong in some countries. Slovenia, I see here, has done a few changes. In Romania, we had some changes that are important. For example, small-scale forest owners don't need a forest management plan since 2015. So there are some incremental changes. We see also that in the Western countries, there are these red arrows pointing downwards, which means there are more restrictions. Most of these restrictions are coming for this new type of requirements regarding environmental and climate change adaptation. So we are still facing, even at the level of 2015, this governance dilemma, especially in some of the countries, how to deal with the forest owners to empower their decision or to use command and control instruments. And now maybe more to the topic of the today presentation, we see this shifting paradigm that has also mentioned today between the former EU forest strategy, which in the introduction put the aim of the strategy to consider the special situation of all small-scale forest owners and to address this by market-based private sector tools, to what we found in the introduction of the current EU forest strategy, in which the EU forest strategy aimed to use better regulation requirements, considering and respecting the principle of subsidiarity. But this has been already under discussion if this is feasible or not. So what I put here, I took examples from the EU forest strategy that might have implication in an increased regulatory level across Europe. These sticks, we call them in forest policy, the command and control instruments, and we see that the new forest strategy looks for a design of regulation favorable to long-lasting wood products, reinforce the implementation of the cascading principle, strengthen the sustainability safeguards of forest-based bioenergy, prohibiting the sourcing of forest biomass from primary forest, creating a legally binding instrument for ecosystem restoration, revision of the legislation on forest reproductive material, developing a regulatory framework for certifying carbon removals, and of course what is coming from the biodiversity strategy to put at least 10% of the EU land under strict legal protection. All these, from my perspective, go to an increased level of regulation. So the strategy creates now a framework in which the command and control instruments will have probably a more emphasis. There is also acknowledge the need that private owners and managers need drivers and financial incentives. So there are examples also in the strategy where we can rely on payment scheme for ecosystem services, to promote new green business models, or even to use voluntary certification schemes in the case of close to nature forestry. But again, here it is an issue on who will finance this and how this will be financed. So to conclude, there was a question, and I think yes, from my perspective, if we read all these statements of the new EU forest strategy, there is a desired trend to a more uniform distribution of the regulatory frameworks at the EU level. This is mainly under the pressure of biodiversity and climate change policies. We don't know exactly how the distribution of the fiscal advantages and the financial instruments will be done to balance these cost benefits of private owners via the EU mechanism in order to assure this a fair competitive condition for private forest owners. It is less emphasized this idea that we have a strategy for bioeconomy, and bioeconomy normally need to use market mechanisms. So thus market signals are needed to direct the management decision of forest owners, and we see a bit of contradiction in increased regulations and this idea to give freedom to forest owners to actually act in this new bioeconomy context. And of course, all these diverse needs and preference of different ownership types that we pointed across Europe need a diversity of policy instruments. So we cannot rely only on regulatory framework, and these policy instruments need to be diversified and adapted at the country-specific level. This was from my part. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the questions that you might have.
Thank you very much for the really good presentation. And we go to our last speaker today, by the role of the forest owners in the implementation in the EU forest-related policies. We would like to give the floor to Mr. Marco Onida, European Commission of DG Agri Environment.
Yes, good morning. Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting meeting. Being a lawyer, have been very interested in following the presentations, very informative. So thank you for this debate. Maybe a couple of introductory remarks based on what has been said this morning. I think that it's inevitable to remind that private property is not an absolute concept. Private property is recognized in the constitutions of all the member states of having also a social function. So it can be compressed according to the needs of society. What is to me was remarkable is there was a lot of reference to the EU forest strategy. Last also by Mr. Nicky Forel, whom I salute because I am very fond of his articles. But I think that there is a fundamental misunderstanding when people talks about the EU forest strategy as having increased the framework for command and control. In fact, the slide that that was shown is only referring to issues which are not in the forest strategy, but are in other policies like nature restoration law, different policy. So we should make clear that we say what is what. These are not things that come from the forest strategy. Anyway, compared to the alleged restrictions on property rights from the EU, it's very interesting to see what happens in the member states. I mean, we've seen Slovenia ban on clear cuts since 1949. Slovenia and Croatia obligation for administrative procedure and decisions on every single step. So this goes way far more beyond what the EU forest strategy asks for. So I think that there is a bit of misconception when people think that the forest strategy leads to more centralization and more command and control when we look at what happens in the member states. Finally, again, introductory remark. I think that the fact that I mean, this is more an economic debate rather than a legal debate, because there was a lot of philosophic discussion that one could bring in between neoclassical approach to economy or state intervention. But I mean, what is to me important to say, of course, with the greatest respect for everything that was said, that I respect very much, is that it hasn't been mentioned that we are living the two worst crises of the history of humans, climate and biodiversity. Biodiversity state of EU forest is not good. This is official information by the member states themselves. So it would have been interesting to have this as a bit of a starting basis. That you know, this is also an important aspect. I mean, all the for instance, in the boreal region, all the forest ecosystems are in an unfavorable state of conservation. This is official information from the boreal country. So this is and the fact that this I say more as a personal remark, that more, let's say, less compression of the social function of forests and more individual property rights lead to more sustainability. I think that this is contradicted by history and is also contradicted by science. Anyway, it's not for me to make a political talk. Our commissioner has already replied to most of the criticisms that were made extensively, both in the Council and the European Parliament, and has provided all the elements. What I would like to do here is very briefly just draw your attention to what the EU forest strategy says in relation to forest owners. And I won't be long on this slide because it's too much text. I just put them as a kind of memo, and then people can see this themselves in the EU forest strategy. When we just extract what the strategy says in relation to forest owners. We have the introduction, which there's a clear recognition of the motivation and dedication of forest owners and their roles, and of the financial incentives, in particular for forest owners. Again, I won't read everything. In chapter 2, which is the supporting the socioeconomic functions of forest, there is again the recognition of the role of forest owners, and then the revenue of forest owners via, first of all, the bioenergy revenues, and via the non-wood revenues, which are supposed, which the strategy wants to promote further, and of the benefits of forest owners in relation to the development of skills and further education. In chapter 3, which is the chapter on the environmental protection of forest, there is a very clear repeated reference to forest owners that need to be supported in the transition. Here again, I put all these are just cut and paste from the forest strategy, and I put in red each time the reference. The fact that when we would like to recommend a more close to nature management of forests, which is, by the way, for instance, in Slovenia is what is happening already. This is in some cases something that is already embraced by many European forest owners. There are examples of good practices which really build on what the opportunities for forest owners are. And then there is an entire chapter 3-4, which is entirely dedicated to financial incentives for forest owners and managers. And I think it's the first time that there is a forest strategy that is so explicit in that sense, with a commitment to work on payment for ecosystem services, to recommend, because of course responsibility on payment for ecosystem services in the end is with the member states, but to recommend the use of the possibilities that are open under EU law for payment for ecosystem services. So there is quite a lot of text on this. There are examples mentioned. Some were mentioned today in the presentations. The Finnish mezzo, the Croatian tax, the French label carbon bas was also mentioned, and so on and so forth. Again, this is what the quite extensive chapter 3-4 says. In chapter 4, again, when we have the whole chapter about the forest observation and monitoring, the forest owners are clearly part of that chapter as well. And also in terms of the benefit of further consistency of planning. Research and innovation, chapter 5. Very clear, direct reference to the fact that research and innovation can help diversify the income of forest owners and managers. So we turn always around the same topic. And then on inclusive and coherent governance, the new governance for debate between the Commission and the Member States, Commission and the stakeholders, the forest owners are clearly recognized as well. And then finally, in the conclusions, with the invitation to all stakeholders to engage in the debate, which is currently taking place. So just for curiosity, in the forest strategy, biodiversity is mentioned 72 times. The forest strategy builds on the biodiversity strategy. So one would expect to have biodiversity quoted everywhere and mentioned everywhere. It's actually about twice as the word forest owner. So it's not such, I was asking yesterday some people, how many times do you think if biodiversity is mentioned and forest owners is mentioned, what is the ratio? People will say 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 10. It's actually around 1 to 2. Forest protection is mentioned 6 times. Okay, whatever this means. I mean, it's just a curiosity. Anyway, just to sum up, the focus of the EU forest strategy on forest owners is multifaceted. We have a clear focus on the acknowledgement of the role of forest owners. We have it in the introduction, we have it in the sustainable forest management in chapter 3.2, we have it in the governance, we have it in the conclusions. We have a reference on the duties, the duty of care. Of course, there are duties and constraints which are in line with what is happening already in terms of existing for many decades, the environmental legislation that exists for many decades. Let's not forget that forest protection is entirely part of environmental policy of the EU, with a total legitimization of action as confirmed by the Court of Justice. So we have mentions of forest owners, and in that sense, we have it not as a kind of stick, but as a request for instruments of compensation and help the forest owners to manage the transition. In Chapter 3, in Chapter 4, we have very clear reference on revenues of forest owners on the bioenergy and the Red Directive, then on wood, and the payment for customer services and the research, and then on the benefits, the indirect benefits, not necessarily monetary benefits, but skills, advisory services, and planning. So this is just to say how much the forest owners is enshrined in the EU forest strategy. Then there is another dimension which is important, it's extremely important, which is the fact that forest owners may also lead by example, and they are essential for policy development. There are a few ongoing networks and projects which are crucial. I would quote only some: Integrate Network, the Pro-Silva Network, which is a network of forest owners, and then projects like Life Go for the Interreg ASCA 4, or the Horizon Sincere on payment for ecosystem services. These are all examples where the forest owners have put themselves in the, let's say, in the middle of the development and promoted networks and projects which are extremely important. And in fact, the forest strategy is building on this on these examples. Final observations. Forest owners own the land, but they do not own the provisioning services. This is normal when we talk about ecosystem services. Of course, the right of ownership is an important right. It's constitutionally protected, but the provisioning services is not the ownership of the person that owns the land. This is a common good. Restrictions of private property for social and environmental functions are part of the key in the member states and in the EU. I said that already. There's a social function of property rights. Very clear need to provide compensations and alternatives. And here several possibilities exist. The Commission has also engaged to provide guidance on this. So just to say that we are absolutely aware and conscious about the fact that the forest owners need to be on board. We cannot have a successful implementation of the forest strategy and the related policies without having the forest owners on board. So it's that's why we have all this chapter on financial incentives and help to transition and so on. Of course, there is an issue of time, because the ecosystem service may be delayed. The service which is offered by forest, for instance, in the case of climate, is delayed with respect to the cost, immediate cost of the income foregone. I was just reading into a recent Portuguese pilot, which is exactly meant to face that with how to compensate over many years, which is in many cases exceed the programming period of the state budget for services which are long term. Then we have to distinguish issues of the indemnities. For instance, it was mentioned, I don't need to repeat that, it was mentioned many times when we talk about the expropriation, that there is an indemnization for expropriation, with a different dimension, which is the dimension of incentivizing, so going beyond business as usual. This is also very important for policies. And then, as I said already, with those examples, the role of forest owners as pioneers in demonstration cases is really, really very important. So I will just stop here and say, I think that there is in my opinion, some misconception about what the forest strategy does in terms of restricting property rights, which is not really the case compared to what is already existing in the member states. And also maybe there is a lack of knowledge about the potential of this forest strategy for the forest faunus. Of course, anything can be discussed and anything can be improved. We had a very fruitful discussion in the council that has welcomed the forest strategy and has made some remarks. So this is a process which is continuing. I think that the role of forest owners and property rights is central, and we look forward to use the opportunities opened by these forest strategies in order to make sure that the forests can be as they deserve to be, and the forest owners continue to be at the center of the attention in a positive way, and that the forest can play the role that they need to play for the two main crises I mentioned, climate and biodiversity, while at the same time ensuring a continuing thriving bioeconomy and well-being in the rural areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We come to the end with the presentations. I'm opening the floor to discussion. And on the end, we do some conclusions. I will do the same like before. The one who wants to discuss can raise the hand, and we will give you the floor to speak.
Maybe before we have first speakers. Okay, now we see also first hand. Just a comment how we as a forest owner in East European countries see EU policies, why we are kind of uncertain or even scared in some parts. In our states, limitations are without compensations are still normal. This what you were saying, that these compensations should be there, that should occur, that national funds should be provided, are very difficult to obtain. Also, all the funds that you mentioned are under national jurisdictions. So if EU or the Commission plans to do something, they should also ensure that it's not going against private ownership limitations without compensations, so that we are not going like in the first speech mentioned to the communist times, when the top-down approach was then at the end seen at it was. So first was Algis Gajutis. Please take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And I came from Lithuania. I'm chairman of the National Private Forest and Landowners Association. And then, and for a question for representative of DG Environment, dear Marco, I have one question. Only financial instrument you have, Commission have in your hands to deal with forest strategy, biodiversity strategy. It is a common agriculture forestry funding. And at the end of the December, the countries should present drafts of the strategic plans for agriculture and rural development. My question is very simple. Is Commission is going to check and guarantee proportional funding for the forestry measures? Because responsibilities and activities which are foreseen in forest strategy, biodiversity strategy, renewable energy directive, and so on, renovation wave, so on, for forestry is quite abundant. So just simple question, is it any intention from Commission side to check those strategic plans, projects of strategic plans, and to comment on this if funding for the forestry measures will be very minimal or not proportional to the objectives Commission raised to private forest owners. Thank you.
Shall I directly reply?
Yes, maybe best.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Algis. This is a very, very good question. By the way, I see my colleague Alfonso from DG Agri as well as a participant, so maybe he wants to comment on that because we have done this together. The forest strategy is the result of a joint work of DG Agri, DG Environment, and DG Climate. We are aware of the fact that the uptake of the funds for forests has not been, except with some countries, has not been particularly satisfactory. And there are many reasons. We don't have time now to analyze that. But yes, we do. Actually, we are very busy in assessing the CAP strategic plans and in recommending member states to include the aspects which derive directly from the forest strategies. Of course, as my colleagues of DG Agri can tell you more precisely, the last word is with the member states. So we can recommend. We are having written exchanges with all countries on the CAP strategic plans, and we are meeting also them. But in the end, as you know, the new CAP leaves quite a lot of discretion to the member states. So we won't be able to force them. But yes, we are doing this, including from the point of view of the financial compensation. We are discussing with the member states to the extent that the Commission can influence that.
Can we hear each other?
Yes, good morning. Maybe very briefly.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see if the camera is on. Yeah. Good morning to everyone. Yes, indeed, I can only confirm what Marco just said. You know that the CAP strategic plans adoption will follow a procedure whereby the Commission will do its best to try to foster the integration of EU relevant policies into the design of the CAP strategic plans. It has been the case since the start of the process, where we have been providing recommendations to the member states. And now we are in a process for exchange with the member states on how these recommendations are being taken up in the draft plans that they are sharing with us. Member states are supposed to send their CAP strategic plans in full by the end of this year. The deadline, the official deadline would be the 1st of January. And there will be a process of interaction between the Commission and the member states, where DG Agri will be under lead, but then also in interaction with all their services to try to get to ensure that the recommendations from the Commission are uptaken in the CAP strategic plans, but in due respect of the principle of joint management, whereby the states are at the end the ones deciding on the basis of their needs assessment what they are going to implement. Finally, well, of the recommendations we issued to the member states, there were recommendations dealing with forest-related interventions for about 75% of the member states. and this is the process we are in. But at the end, it is important that the member states take their own responsibility and ensure that the rural development by dimension takes due consideration of the importance of forests, sustainable forest management and forestry in their rural development plans. That's all. Thank you.
We have one question from the chat. Maybe Satu Maria would like to take the floor, or should I read it?
Well, I can read it if you want to. I don't mind. It's in the chat. So I was just wondering, because Mr. Onida said that if I understood it right, he referred to the fact that a forest owner can own the land, but everything which is above the land is kind of like common good. So now I'm referring to the provisioning services, which he was stating in. And as I Googled that, it's only mentioned in the National Wildlife Federation, or by the National Wildlife Federation. And I was just wondering if you could explain this phenomenon a little bit, because frankly, I don't understand it. Thank you.
Yes. First of all, I did not say absolutely that the owner, forest owner, does not own everything which is above the land. This is, you said it. I didn't say that. I talked about provisioning services. This is a normal, if you check into, we don't have time to go into that now, but if you just check into the literature on ecosystem services, you will see that there is a very clear distinction, and this is also reflected in the legislation in many countries. There are laws about both compensation and obligations which reflect that. The point is the provisioning services, for instance, of course you own the land, you own the forest, but the function of the forest goes beyond simply providing timber. The forest is also providing a function in terms of biodiversity, water filtration, air filtration, climate mitigation, climate adaptation. The theory of ecosystem services says that the owner of the land does not own these services. This is the point. Okay, it's a question which is used in order to distinguish between the different aspects of the property. So the provisioning services. So of course you own the tree. The tree is yours, but the function of the tree for society in terms of mitigating climate change is not a function that you own. That is what is meant. Thank you.
Now we have the second speaker, Zdenko Bogovic, would like to take the floor.
Thank you. We are so happy that from DG Environment, Mr. Onida is together with us, and we have some straight questions, if it's possible to answer. We are in this moment we are finishing in the Croatia priority action framework. It's made by the Ministry of Nature Protection, and these days our Prime Minister he will sign that. It's a financial document for the, let's say, environmental funds, financial, and has to be sent in DG Environment. But as we had some points there, and we had some influence in that documents, the question is that document obligate for the state? Is it obligation? Because in that document is huge financial funds for the, for example, forests sector, but in the same time, in that documents been point the CAP, Common Agriculture Policy, program. And of course, these two documents are not, let's say, in line. But as we have obligation as a state to send that to the DG Environment in Brussels, we are really interested how you will, let's say, check that document in comparison with in the same Ministry of Agriculture and Common Agriculture Policy in the Brussels, because in our case, these two documents are completely opposite. Thank you.
Shall I reply?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I mean, I try to. Unfortunately, I don't think I have a full reply for that. I know that PAFs are part of the nature legislation; they're obligatory. But I have to admit, I don't know the details on how this is followed up. So I'm really happy if you write me to put you in touch with the colleagues who deal with that, and that for sure will have a better reply than the one I could give you. I could give you bits of replies, but I would prefer you get precise replies from the people who are responsible for that, my colleagues.
Thank you.
Okay, we go to the next one is Natalie Hufnagel.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for this very informative second round of presentations. And I just wanted to ask a practical question. Can we have the reference to the articles that were mentioned by the professor from Romania? Could we have them, Mr. Nikiforel, in maybe sent to all our emails? That would be very helpful. And then a follow-up question to what to Marco and Nira, to what my colleague Satu Maria was already asking. How does this fall together with the fact that trees are by definition next to soil the biggest CO2 storage, or have the biggest CO2 storage capacity? So if we follow your arguments, then the fact that CO2 is stored in trees and is thus taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere would then be a common good, and the forest owners who invest in increasing this storage by active forest management would not be able to have put a price on this CO2 storage capacity. Because if I follow your argumentation, then you say this is a common good, and we as forest owners own the tree, but we cannot ask for compensation or a kind of market price for the fact that we store carbon in the trees and also in the subsequent wood processing value chain. Because as we know, substitution is an elementary effect of climate change mitigation. This was the first question. The second question, to me, and I'm now, I think, since 22 years in this forest policy business on European level, it looks increasingly to me that the Commission has an attitude. You design the policy, but when it comes to responsibility for implementation and also the financial, let's say, implications that come with it, you say it's not any longer our business, it's the member states' business. So a very concrete question now, with the effects on management restrictions coming out of the biodiversity strategy, out of the forestry strategy, is the Commission planning, in particular with view to payment of ecosystem services, to also initialize a single standing financial instrument that is covering then all these new demands? And the last thing, and this is really now, I think, pertinent, I would like to invite you to Bavaria and give you a guidance through what sustainable forest management is, because and also in connection with property rights, because we all know, and this trend is clearly shown on global level, that in all the countries where there is an increased shift from, let's say, state forest property rights to communal or private property rights, the level of sustainable forest management is increasing, and so is increasing the quality of the forests. And I would simply like to show you as a kind of basic understanding what property rights and sustainable forest management, how they two interlink, so that maybe you have also a better background when you argument about property rights, sustainable forest management, and common good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who starts?
We are waiting for the answers, Mr. Marco.
Okay, shall I? Okay. First of all, again, there are things that were said that I haven't said. I am talking about the function of something that is owned. It could be trees, it could be soil. It's exactly the same thing. It is the function. It's not the tree or the soil. It is the fact that you own something which has a function for society, and this is a very long-standing tradition of legal doctrine distinguishing the property right with the functions. It is absolutely connected to the possibilities to have compensation. In fact, this kind of legal narrative is precisely used to have compensation. So it's not against the forest owner, it's actually in favor of the forest owner, because it is precisely because of the recognition of these functions that you can get compensation. I was very recently visiting very interesting experiences in the Basque countries in Spain, where there are very good pilot projects where the people owning the forest are compensated because of the higher quality of water coming from forest, because the water coming from forest is higher quality, so they get part of the money which people pays for water to the water companies. It goes to compensation to the forest companies. This is a very, very interesting case from I think it stems from the Sincere project, and we hope to have more of those. I think that with the greatest respect, I think it's a bit black and white describe the thing. The Commission decides policies and leaves the member states free to decide on financing. Is not really the case. First of all, when we are talking about the communication here, the forest strategy, when we talk about legislation, the last word on the legislation is on the co-legislator, which is the member states and the European Parliament. The Commission is only making proposal. Usually, the Commission works also with the same principles for the use of funds. I mean, makes proposals, but in the end, it's not the budget authorities. The regulations are decided by the co-legislator. I think that what my colleague before explained and what I mentioned as well goes exactly in that direction. In the case of the forest strategy, there is a huge dimension of financing and incentives that is exactly meant to say, okay, we want to go into a certain direction, which we believe it's in the interest of forest owners, and we want for the parts which are economically which have an economic impact, we want to bring in extra funds. And I think that in any case, the implementation of both levels is for the member states. Finally, well, I'm really happy to come and see. We have been, my commissioner in person has been visiting a lot of forests in Sweden, in Finland, in Germany, and myself. I was recently. I'm really happy that you say that, because I myself very recently proposed to my director to have a field visit in Bavaria. So your invitation comes absolutely welcome, and I think that once we will have the possibility to start traveling, because of this pandemic is not ending, we'll be very happy to go and have this dialogue also with the people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We give the floor to the next one who wants to give the question. Nils Tesho.
Yeah, my name is Niels Träskholm. I'm a forestry owner in Sweden. And since we've gotten this now, the new, say, strategic plan for for forestry, and we are looking at a Green Deal policy, a new Green Deal policy. And I have a feeling of, when we are sitting here more from a philosophical point of view, is that we are talking all of a sudden about property rights. And property rights is a tool to obtain sustainability. And I think an overwhelming majority of us forestry owners, since we are talking forestry at this point in time, want to do it sustainably because we want to see this land passed on from generation to generation to generation. And now, since we have gotten these new things with the forest strategy and the new Green Deal policy, and we are all of a sudden, again, pointing out here, talking property rights, some way or another, a lot of forestry owners and managers feel that these policies and strategies are going to infringe on this. Why is not from DG Environment and DG Agri or from the Commission talking about give the forestry managers incentives to achieve what you want, instead of we're going to feel that we are infringed upon? Because usually when people feel infringed upon, they're going to find ways to get around them. And that's really my point. And it would be interesting to hear approach from the beginning.
I may start. I will start and leave to Alfonso if you want to complement. I think that, I mean, this is a very good point, but this is precisely what the forest strategy does. It's precisely, I think that it was very well put, this comment and question, and I think that nobody can disagree with what you said. But this is precisely what you have in the forest strategy, with an equally important dimension on incentives than the drawing the attention to the need to improve the state of forest. I don't know if Alfonso, you want to comment on that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I agree with Marco on this. So basically, let me explain briefly how the CAP works, and particularly this new CAP, which is gives the member states huge flexibility to design the interventions they want to support in the countries. Basically, with this new CAP, the Commission is giving leeway to the states for them to, based on of course, the recommendations made in the light of the policies that we are promoting, and this means the forest strategy, but also the biodiversity policy, the water policy, or whatever. Member states have now the freedom to design the interventions that are best fit to their territories, and that would fulfill the maximum amount possible of the 9 specific objectives that are defined in the CAP, which involve both social, economic, and environmental objectives. The Commission, of course, has the duty to ensure that all the interventions are meeting the EU legislation, and also provide recommendations, as we said before, on what types of interventions we would propose to the member states. But at the end, the member states are the ones that are designing and proposing their interventions, and there is an exchange between the member states and the Commission on the logic and on the design of the intervention. And finally, the member states, if we are talking about rural development interventions, which are the ones that cover forestry, they design these interventions and put them for the forest owners, in the case of forest-related interventions, for them to choose whether they want to implement or not voluntarily. And then, if they agree to take these interventions, then they get the funds from the budget. But at the end, in the end, the latest institution responsible for the design of the intervention that will be taken or not by the forest owners will be the member state. So what we are doing is to set up, to propose the kinds, very generic kinds of interventions that could be supported, but then the details, the design, and even the specificity for each different region, each country, is something that has to be carried out by the member state. And we, as the Commission, what we'll do is to monitor the process and provide our advice, our comments, our suggestions, and ensure that the legislation is fulfilled. That's all. But at the end, I think there is an important part of the responsibility on the member states, which have to be proactive. And in this case, I understand it is a policy that is totally restructured from the former LCAT, but an important part of the responsibility of the design of the interventions lies on the member states.
May I just make one comment here?
Yes, Nils, I saw
your answers, but just one comment. I think if forestry owners and managers would have seen these policies and strategies with incentives, then we wouldn't have been sitting here talking about property rights.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is Sven Erik.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I will try to a bit reflect and maybe on the way answering some of the questions that have been raised also here. And first one is about the crisis, the global crisis, especially for the climate. We do have a global crisis. And the question is, how do we solve them? How do we solve those crises in the best way? And from my point of view, strong property right is a way out to solve these crises. We heard very good from Finland, Marco saying that the forest miracle in Finland comes out of one of the strongest property rights in the world. It gives these intensives that Nils was just talking about, creating something better for the next generation. And at the Stenko from Croatia was talking about and pointing at the losses for society that more regulations leads to. Secondly, it's good that forest owners are mentioned in the policy documents in the EU forest strategy, but planning and monitoring and steering from above do affect property rights. And if we then also widen the scope to the taxonomy, to RED, to nature restoration law, LULUCF, and taken together, all these affect the forest owner's property right in a negative way. And thirdly, I think the big question that we really is talking about here is the question of competence and subsidiarity. Who can decide in the end? And forest and forestry are competences that member states have not left to the EU to decide on. And that is due to good reasons, because forestry and forests in Europe are so very different. And finally, the question of provisioning services that don't belong to owner. I think just concluding that we don't have the same view on that one, Mr. Onida. But thank you very much for interesting points you made here.
Thank you very much, Sen. Mr. Onida wants to say something.
No, I mean, I put it in the chat. It's simply that I'm grateful for these remarks. It's very good to have dialogue, and it's very good to have different ideas. Just wanted to precise that forest and forestry is also a EU competence, because it's a shared competence between the EU and the member states when it comes to the several legal bases that the EU has for dealing with forests, environment, energy, agriculture, and so on. So it is also a EU competence.
Thank you very much. Mihail Kubrinega wants to have
well, I would just like to emphasize one point of view that was mentioned, but not so directly. From our point of view, and maybe you, for the discussion, for those who have still time, we are now facing in Europe more a danger of lack of management than too much management. We need to actively manage the forest to adapt them to climate change, to have more, to have better quality for the wood processing industry, for the development of the green economy and so on, for more carbon sequestration, both in the forest and in wood-based projects. So we need more active forest management. And of course, the forest strategy is talking about incentives and helping forest owners. But on the other hand, with what we are seeing is that the forest ownership rights are lower, are still on low scale, or are being pushed lower by these new policies, and not just the forest strategy, but all of the policies. So the main question is, will the forest owners invest in the forest? Will we have better forests because of the strategy, or will we have just more unmanaged forest due to the strategy? This is the fear that I think most of the Europe is facing due to the small-scale forestry and lack of secure investments due to new fears. Thank you. Natalie is now second.
Thank you very much, Michael. I just wanted to come back to one point that CEPF President Sven Erik was just mentioning. This issue on competence. So maybe we need to widen our perspective there, because it's not only legal competence, Marco, as you tend to interpret it. It's also the competence on the professional side. So when you write something about forestry and forest management, you should have some idea what this complex system is about. And so it's that when we talk about competence, then it's twofold. Of course, there is a legal component, and there I dare to say that we also have a different perspective than the European Commission. but then it's also the aspect of knowing about how the interlinkages in sustainable forest management, how they all fit together. And so it's not so easy to say the European Commission has the competence. It might be from a legal perspective, but when it comes to content, there I think could be some competence built up in the Commission. And I'm very happy that once you would be allowed to, and the restrictions have fallen, that you are ready to come to Bavaria for a visit into our forests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Onidi wants to say something? Or?
Yeah, I'm totally grateful and aware of the Unterschied zwischen Fähigkeit und Kompetenz. So I think that this is something that we can discuss. Thank you very much. I unfortunately have to leave. This was supposed to finish at 12. I have another meeting at 12:30, so I'm already late.
Yes, we are already finished. Thank you very much for your representative here, and we will send some points after the conference. As Mr. Reedy said, we already passed half an hour through the planning the time. So we are closing the discussion. We are coming to the conclusions. Miha will put some points, which is going to go to the member states, and maybe we're going to finish conclusions in a couple of days.
Well, thank you. Check this. Well, thank you. What I wanted to just to say, what I have written down here is the of course the EU and United Nations sustainability goals. EU policies should be in line probably, so we will mention those as a basic, and then these policies and the coherence between the policies and the national competence should be mentioned, as it was so much mentioned in the conference. The economic initiative of the forest owners was mentioned, and questionable national legislations in ex-communistic countries regarding the national constitutions also, but also in regarding to EU law, fair compensations and reimbursement for general benefits, if, of course, the management is somehow restrained due to that general benefits. So we will try to summarize these conclusions, and as said in the beginning, the video is recorded. It will be, after all the presenters agree, also put on YouTube, and then you can share it also with others. Thank you.
President of CFP, Mr. Sven-Erik Hammer, would you like to do some speech for the conclusion of the conference and everything?
No, I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you very much for organizing this conference. You have done a great job. Very good work in a very important topic. So thank you from all of us to all of you.
Thank you very much. On the end, I would like, in the name of the organization, Slovenian Association of Private Forest Owners, I would like to say thank you to all the speakers, particularly in the second period, from to Mihail, to Marko, to Agis, to Gvar, and to Zdenko, and also in the second one to Jože, to Liviu and to the Marco. I think that we have really interesting speeches, the speakers. Now I became almost to the forest. We have interesting speakers, and on the end, I would like to, thanks to the Confederation of European Forest Owners, Kopa Kožeka, ELO, and the Chamber of the Agriculture and Forestry of Slovenia to help us, to support us. On the end, also, we come with this idea. It was from my group almost 1 year ago, and because of the situation in the Europe and in the world, because of the COVID of the 90s, we have big problems to organize some. We have a problem. We couldn't organize the General Assembly. We couldn't organize the similar conference in the live. And on the end, with the not proposal, with the carriages from the president of the CFF, Mr. Sven Erik, we decided to do it. We have a little difficulty, but for the beginners, we are not the professionals. We are still the forest owners, and we do our best. And we thank you to everybody. On the end, we are thank you also to the media who was with us all the time. Some TV and some reporters. We hope that it goes to the Slovenian media, and we also hope that it goes to some European levels. We will continue with these issues, and I hope that some other country carriage, not only the Eastern countries, because we see that the most of the problems of the property rights we have on the post-communist countries, but we see with the new regulation that some Western countries also have the problems. We hope that we encourage somebody else to continue the work, that we, on the end, we are the same country. We should have at least similar level, but when we are speaking about the EU strategy, I said that most of the countries know by the tradition, by the knowledge from the father or grandfather to the son, that how is the best way to do the best for the forest, together with experts from the countries. I think they will do the best in their countries, because we have different types of the forestry, and we have experience, but we just must do the best for our forest in the future. And I don't see on the European level that will be the same. We should put that to the national governments to do it their best job. Thank you very much, and I hope we see as soon as possible alive, not by the screen, because it is a too much different point when you can discuss and do something like that to somebody. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the. On the end, I almost forgot. I also said thanks to Anipo and to the Susan to help us from the Seja staff from the office. And if I forgot somebody, don't be angry on me, because it is too much things in my mind in this moment. Thank you very much. So this conference is closed. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Merry
Christmas. Happy New Year.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Christmas to everybody.
Goodbye.
See you soon, I hope.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.